to Vietnam every year. I've been doing it for a decade. My next journey back to Vietnam is in January, if anybody's interested. We'll be there for Tet. And many reasons we go back, among the many reasons we go back is to transform the experience of being in Vietnam and the meaning of Vietnamese customs like Tet. Many of us who were alive during the time remember the Tet Offensive, and our Vietnam veterans who are here, some of you may have been in Vietnam during Tet. I know, Art, it was sort of okay in Vietnam for you until Tet exploded, right? Yeah. Art Myers, my brother. So I'm going back in January for Tet to change the meaning of Tet for us Americans, to enter into the joyous Lunar Year celebration with the Vietnamese. Tet is their most important holiday. And we will be celebrating Tet with Viet Cong veterans and North Vietnamese Army veterans and Vietnamese, everybody from families to officials who welcome us with extraordinary joy and forgiveness. Well, every year, we go down to the Mekong Delta and visit with Viet Cong veterans, as well as all of the ordinary folk living in the Delta. And we stay with a wonderful man named Tam Tien. Tam is a Viet Cong veteran, and his wife, Madame Tien, is also a Viet Cong veteran. Tam was a young school teacher early in the war. He arrived at his school Monday morning to open it for his children, and it was gone. It had been bombed to smithereens Sunday by American warplanes. And he was a peaceful man. He didn't believe in any war, didn't want to fight. But when he saw his school destroyed, he said, I have no choice. When my school and my children are being bombed, that's a time to take up arms. There's nothing else that's going to stop this. His wife was a little younger than him. She lived in a different village and she went to a different school, and she was in her school, a 10-year-old in her school when it was bombed. And she was one of the few survivors. She helped dig out the other children from the wreckage, and then she too went off and joined the Viet Cong. Well, I want to tell you about the very first time I met Tam Tien. Think about what we might carry if we survived the bombings of our schools, and how we might feel when those who perpetrated the act arrived at our home. Well, this first time, I had a group of about 8 vets and me, and Tam Tien lives on the Mekong River on a small island where he has a small farm and a guest house. More primitive than how we're sleeping. We puttered up to Tam Tien's little dock in our water taxi, and as we arrived at his dock, we saw this beaming man in his pajamas come running over to the dock. They weren't black pajamas, what the Viet Cong wore during the war, but they were definitely pajamas. He came running over in his pajamas. And, can you hear me okay? So he comes running over. Don't know what to expect. We haven't met him before. He pulls up his shirt and he just laughs and he points. And his whole chest and gut area and sides were scarred vividly and viciously. And he pulls up his shirt and he points and says, "Look, here and here and here and here. How funny! You almost killed me!" And, well, right? We don't know if we're supposed to laugh or groan or turn and go home or give reparations. We don't quite understand how to respond. But you almost killed me. How funny. And he's really laughing. And he says, and he looks at our faces and says, no, don't worry. It's really funny. If you had killed me, if I had died from these wounds during the war, I wouldn't have lived to this wonderful day where I could meet you and welcome you home and embrace you as my true brothers and sisters. We had 2 nurses as well with us. As my true brothers and sisters, and we could all become friends. So he escorted us off the boat. He feasted us with tea and fruits and vegetables that he grows right on his island. And he told us his story. And then he went around, we were there for half a day, he went around to every single veteran in our circle and said, I know you don't easily tell your stories, and in America, where I hear that people don't always want to hear veteran stories, but I have to hear every one of your stories. Well, why is that, Tom? Well, because I have to know if we ever met each other before under different circumstances. And after he had us all relaxed from his great sense of humor about our past, our shared past, he said, I really do want to know if we met under different circumstances, but what I'm really getting at is, he said, from now on and forevermore, American and Vietnamese veterans must become the lips and the tongue of the same mouth telling the world the same story. The lips and tongue of the same mouth telling the world the same story. So this is the reconciliation and meaning we can achieve with former foes, and this is the reconciliation and meaning we need to achieve with each other. Abraham Lincoln said we cannot escape history, and that's true, but we also get trapped in history and believe that the political or moral stand we took is the ultimate and the right one, and we may never achieve reconciliation by entering into the larger shared story that we all experienced, that wounded and victimized all of us, and that we all must embrace and find our small piece in the big history. So I work with veterans and war survivors, owning their piece of history, and all the rest of us who didn't serve, owning our piece of history and how we were wounded by it also, and working together to tell the full story of our times and our trials, and become lips and tongue of the same mouth. So, war healing is peacemaking, gathering together former antagonists and foes, whether it was domestically or abroad, doesn't matter. We need to enter the same story to witness and honor each other's motivations, each other's wounds, the goodness each one of us was trying to unfold by the way we lived and the choices we made, the betrayals that each of us experienced when we found out how and why we were being used or misused, and enter into an alliance such that we are on a shared mission to bring war healing to the whole planet. Trauma, we all know the word and we use it commonly now. Trauma is an ancient Greek word. It's actually spelled the same way in Greek, but it's pronounced trauma. And in ancient times, the word trauma specifically meant a stabbing wound. Many or most of the weapons we chose for our prints last night were stabbing weapons, old weapons, right? The lance and the knife and the sword. So trauma was specifically a wound by a stabbing weapon, a knife or a lance or sword, an arrow. But the ancients were wiser than we are in understanding woundedness. And so the word trauma was also used for spiritual wounding by violence. And the ancients and all of our traditional people around the world teach that when we are penetrated by the violence of the world in any form, that is trauma. And it wounds us, body, mind, heart, spirit, community. It wounds us totally and utterly. And trauma is not always, but very often, sudden and unexpected. So the world is put together for me well right now, and I have basic spiritual and existential and community security. And then if I walk outside and I get a phone call that somebody, a loved one died, or a branch falls on my head as I'm walking back to my room. It's sudden, unexpected penetration by violence, and my universe changes immediately, completely, without preparation, and it may utterly undo me. And if we are not really, it will undo me to some extent, inevitably, but if we are not profoundly prepared and trained and willing and able to say yes to the wound, we will be undone. And we need to reconstruct everything about our identities, our place in the universe, what we expect of other people, how we participate after being traumatized. So I work with what we call the invisible wounds of war, post-traumatic stress disorder, and we have to mention military sexual trauma and traumatic brain injury. I hate the phrase, but they're called the 3 signature wounds of these wars. They're all invisible. Some of you know that last year a commission was appointed to determine whether or not survivors with post-traumatic stress disorder in the military get the Purple Heart. You know this? And our High Commission determined no, it's not going to be honored as a genuine war wound because no blood was spilled. No blood, no medal. This is a terrible, another form of denial and of shaming regarding the totality of the wounding that happens from war.
It's a betrayal.
Yes.
Betrayal, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's another betrayal. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we still need to make great progress in recognizing and honoring the invisible wounds. Many of us carry wounds from sexual abuse as well. So I want us to be aware of military sexual trauma and how prevalent it is. To the best of our understanding, between a third and half of the women serving in the military experience military sexual trauma, and between a quarter and a third of the men serving. It's epidemic. And this is beyond the scope of our conversation right now, but let us think about why sexual violence and trauma and transgression occurs in epidemic proportions in our military that is supposed to be teaching restraint and discipline and not using excessive force, but only the moral use of force. Just a few words about the wound we call post-traumatic stress disorder and how I work with it. Most of you probably know it's classified as a stress and anxiety disorder. And the most common forms of treatment are medications, and after that, medications, and after that, more medications. And the VA generally uses medication plus cognitive behavioral therapy. Let's train you how to think differently and teach you how to behave under ordinary civilian circumstances. And if you can think differently and take your meds and keep your symptoms under control, well, maybe you can have something of a life. The mainstream model does not believe in or try to practice healing. And in many, many instances, in contrast to what we do here, hearing each other's stories, honoring and salving each other's wounds, working together to overcome betrayal, the general form of treatment is another form of denial and betrayal. And our veterans are having their tongues cut out. In many programs, they're not even allowed to speak about their war experiences. Oh, you can't talk about that because it's going to re-traumatize you. We're just going to teach you to avoid it. It lives inside me. I have to have it witnessed, and I have to have support, and I have to get it out, and I have to achieve reconciliation, forgiveness, or else it's going to kill me inside. So many mainstream approaches don't go there. The wound we call post-traumatic stress disorder today has been known since ancient times. Most of us have read the Iliad, yeah? About half of us have read the Iliad, but all of us have heard of the Iliad. The Iliad is replete with the wound we call post-traumatic stress disorder. If you remember the Iliad, even if you saw the lousy movie Troy, that really did a terrible job with the Iliad, nonetheless, when you see the people, Achilles, the greatest of the Greek warriors, was the most savage of the Greek warriors. People think of him as the hero of the Iliad. He's not. He's the anti-hero. Hector, the Trojan warrior, who only uses force to try to defend his besieged city, and who does not let himself commit atrocities, and who does not go berserk on the battlefield, is the hero. He's the noble spiritual warrior who can contain and can use force only for the essential warrior values of preservation and protection.
He ends up getting dragged around the citadel.
That's right.
Behind Achilles on his chariot.
Exactly. Achilles slaughters him mercilessly. As he's dying, Hector says to Achilles, "I see who you are now. I thought you were a man with a heart, but now I see that you are a man with a heart of stone." Achilles slaughters him and drags his body around the citadel behind his chariot. Achilles commits numerous atrocities. He slaughters prisoners. He goes berserk on the battlefield. He kills Hector in this terrible way. I won't go into the whole story, but my point is that what we call post-traumatic stress disorder today was known in ancient times. Homer recorded it. It's in Roman literature. It's in Egyptian hieroglyphics. The Old Testament and the New Testament are full of traumatic wounding, full of it. Abraham sacrificing Isaac. Noah after the flood. The first kings of Israel, Solomon and David, had massive post-traumatic stress disorder. They slaughtered thousands and thousands of innocents and were celebrated for it. They went berserk on the battlefield. They betrayed their people over and over again. If you read the Psalms of David, some of them are beautiful statements of faith, but others are songs of utmost despair. I am a God-bereft person. I have lost my sacredness. I have lost my way. I have betrayed the people and betrayed what God wanted of me. So those two kings were in terrible despair and had the traumatic wounding. There are many other examples. We have known about this wound since ancient times. We know of more than 80 different names throughout history that societies have given this wound that we call post-traumatic stress disorder today. My favorite name, because it expresses to me the core of the wound, is from the Lakota people, who call this wound Narinapeapi, which means the spirits left him. The spirits left him. The spirits left Achilles. When all the loving and civilizing and restraining spirits leave us and we're left with nothing but the berserk, that's when we become that servant of Ares. And that's what Achilles became on the battlefield. And Homer shows it to us to warn us. And of course, we've inherited it today. Traumatic wounding is so severe today that animal psychologists all around the planet are seeing the same characteristic breakdown and diagnosing PTSD in elephants, bears, wolves, parrots, dogs, cats, whales, dolphins. Imagine elephants committing sexual abuse or abusing or abandoning their children. That doesn't happen in the natural conditions. It is happening now because their lives and their environment are being so assaulted by violent trauma that they're breaking down the same way we human beings break down. So working on the wounding from war and violence is very much out of compassion and concern for all of our people who serve, but it goes way beyond that. It's really about seeing the depth of the wounding that has happened to our planet from the violence that we've perpetrated for thousands of years, and that our planet, the entire living system of our planet, is cracking and breaking in the characteristic ways that we call post-traumatic stress disorder in the individual. It's happening to our social systems, and it's happening to the entire ecosystem. So with this understanding, since we have this terrible acronym PTSD, I translate the acronym in two different ways than post-traumatic stress disorder. Before I say that, has anybody seen George Carlin's stand-up routine about PTSD? Okay, only two of you. Go to YouTube and look at it, watch it. George Carlin was a veteran. He was 7 years in the Air Force. And a lot of his anger at our culture comes from his military experience and his brotherhood with others who served, and the disillusionment and betrayal that he and we all feel. Well, Carlin has this 5-minute stand-up routine that he did after the first Gulf War, because he was so enraged at the way veterans were treated coming back and the denial of PTSD. And I can't do a George Carlin, but he goes from shell shock to combat fatigue to PTSD. And shell shock, it was 2 words, 2 syllables, you know people are in pain. But then combat fatigue, well, it's still 2 words, but it's 4 syllables. And it was 2 words, 2 syllables, you know people are in pain. But then combat fatigue, well, it's still 2 words, but it's 4 syllables. And there's no sense of pain. It's just tired. I'm fatigued. I'm used up. And then from combat fatigue to post-traumatic stress disorder. 8 or 10 syllables, too many words. It's hard to even remember the name of the wound, and there's nothing about pain and suffering in it. It sounds like a medical condition, and of course, then the medical establishment takes over its treatment. In Vietnam, we meet with Vietnamese young people, high school and college age and young adults, who are urgent to meet our veterans, because they say, we don't want you to be statistics in our history books. We want to know the human beings you are. Please tell us your story from the war and ever since. So sometimes when our vets have been with the Vietnamese youngsters for the first time, they're stunned. They say, we've heard about this thing called post-traumatic stress disorder, but we thought it was like the flu. It's something you get, and you go to bed for a few weeks and you rest, and then it goes away. We didn't know that you've been suffering your whole life ever since you were here the first time. And we don't want you to. We want to help you heal. So PTSD, since we have that acronym, I translated post-terror soul distress.
There you go.
Soul distress. And trauma's okay because it means wound, but a lot of people don't know that, and it also sounds like a technical, intellectual, or medical term, terror. When we are in violence, we are terrorized and terrified. We experience terror. Ares is the god who brings the experience of terror. So after terror, our souls are in profound distress. And we need to do our soul work with the utmost urgency in order to restore soulfulness out of that terror. The other way I translate PTSD is post-terror social disorder. Social disorder, for a number of reasons. One is whenever a society, any society, orients itself toward aggression and violence, it is in disorder, inherently. If we're healthy, we're meant to use our resources to take care of each other, the earth, our children, and prepare a good future. When we use up all our resources, as we are doing now on 3 wars, we're in a terrible social disorder, and society itself has broken down and is not working toward creation, nurturing, preservation, and restoration. So, and everybody becomes disordered and disoriented. When our previous commander-in-chief ordered the Iraq War, an illegitimate and invasive war for immoral purposes, and told the rest of us, don't worry about it, go shopping, you go shopping and the troops will take care of it. He was prescribing a social disorder of the most profound kind, the illegitimate use of force, and just let the troops carry the burden, and as the rest of us can go on and feeding the economy and not be affected at all. Well, that's bullshit. We can't. And it's a lie and a denial, and it really prescribes PTSD as a massive social wound and tells the entire country, be wounded in this way by ignoring, not caring, continuing to feed the consumer machine while just a few people give service and carry the burden of that. So we have to heal our soul wound, the soul distress, and we have to heal a social disorder. I am profoundly hoping that together we can work together to heal both of those dimensions of our violent wounding. I hope and trust that we will expose our souls to each other, and that we will especially make time for our veterans present to give witness, so that all of us together can learn of the horrors that they experienced, that they carry, and we can all take responsibility together for putting anybody in those conditions and for the necessary reparation work afterwards. I hope we can do that and tend each other's souls, and also expose to each other any and all of the ways that our souls have been distressed and wounded by violence. As many of us are victims of violence. Maybe all of us. Well, all of us, yes. We wouldn't be here if we weren't. We wouldn't have discovered each other if we hadn't been violated and traumatized. But I do make a special appeal to us as a group to make some special space for those who've served in the military and who, especially those who have survived combat, to witness to us and let us hear from their souls and learn the sacred wisdom they carry from being face to face with the ultimates. And we also have to work together to heal the social disorder and the alienation that we have from each other. I served, I didn't. I served, I protested. I killed for you, I spit on you. Those conflicts are built into us, and we've all experienced and inherited them, and we have to heal those. And then we have to spread this healing to the rest of our society and our communities and everywhere, with an absolute intention to heal from the immoral and illegitimate use of force and violence. So unless we get to the soul level and the social level, we won't achieve healing, and our peacemaking won't take deep roots, because the violence that's still in us will poison us and poison those roots we're trying to plant.
With you. Years ago, I went and heard this guy speak. His name was Michael Bookbinder, and he was talking about how we are as human beings. We're these luminous beings. And he said, through our experiences, personal, family, community, all this shit starts to pile up on top of the luminosity that we are as human beings. And then we go around, start going to workshops, start going to church, and he starts spraying a coat of paint on this ball of shit underneath this luminosity. And we keep putting a paint job on top of a paint job, and then pretty soon we're going around saying, nice paint job.
Yep, right.
Nice paint job. So we go around basically admiring the paint job that we've given. So I think what we're trying to do here is trying to pierce through the paint jobs, which is what the paint job that's been put on this culture at this point in time is ferocious. It's a very tough coat. Mm-hmm. And we have to pierce through that coat and go through the layer of shit that's been put upon, which you go back generation after generation after generation to get to the luminosity that's truly who we really are. And that, to me, when I had the initial conversations with you and when we set up, the thing was we have to make sure that we let people know that we're committed to get through the paint job, through this shit, to the true luminosity that is really who we are as a people, as beings. Because and for me, it's a matter of it's a task. I don't know if it will be done in our lifetimes, to tell you the truth, because it's unsurmountable. And I saw it kill my teachers. It devastated. Ed and I were having a conversation on the van on the way up yesterday, and we realized we both had the same teacher at one point in time. We both, so it was really, thank you for sharing that song of Marcellus. But the reality is that we're committed to that, and I saw it kill my teachers. At one point in time, they lost it completely. When they realized that there was nothing they could do to deal with the level of pain and suffering that was in the world, it destroyed them. And I made that commitment that I was not going to, and the one reason why they could not take it is because they were alone. They didn't have a strong enough community around them to be able to handle the pressure of that. When we sit here in community, what we are, these tiny little beings, gets magnified by an exponential component. Mysteriously, all of a sudden, we're a 10 to the 24th power. Whereas when we were in Minneapolis or in Wales or in Devon, it's one little, but here, together it gets amplified, and we want to continue to magnify that so that it continues to transmit to the next generations. So I think that we're trying to galvanize something that's truly unique and specific so that it holds to that truth that we have to get to. And the piercing of that treacherous layer of lies that becomes the paint job is huge. It's delusional. So that's why, to me, you see these things like Katrina happening, Irene, the earthquake in Japan, it's like it's going to continue to happen because that's what we need in order to break the stranglehold on the world, on the culture, on the world for that matter, that these delusions have on us,
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yes, that's right. And that is one of the main reasons I love our veterans so much, and I love doing this work, because the veterans who are sent overseas to serve in our name carry the sacred wisdom that absolutely pierces the delusions. While the rest of us can have our paint jobs and go shopping, a few of us are sent to the ends of the earth to do the most heinous things in our names, with our resources, as if they had our approval and blessings, and we don't even know what they're doing. So they have the sacred knowledge that we all need, that pierces through all delusions and shows us how our macro system is really operating and what we and our resources are being used for and how our values are being twisted. So this is another reason we need our veteran witness. What's really going on? What's really, really going on that we need to know and take responsibility for? And one more second. At a retreat I led recently, a man who was a chaplain in the Army and due to be deployed next year. I've been mentoring him for a long time. He was in uniform, and he turned to the rest of us at our retreat and said, the president is not going to do right by me. And the senators and the congressmen and people are not going to do right by me when I'm out there, when I'm deployed. And my generals want to do right by me, but they can't. They're under orders. So I'm trapped. The only people who can do right by me are all of you. you civilians. You're really my boss. You're really the ones that all of our politicians and military are supposed to answer to. Our voices are silenced when we're in the military or else, and we're dependent on you watching over us. We'll go out to protect you, but you better have our backs and watch over us and make sure we're used the right way and treated the right way, or else we're all doomed. We who serve and you who are back home. So another way we utterly need and are dependent on each other. I'm sorry. Thanks for waiting.
Yeah, I have a question about justifiable wars. Growing up in the 50s, I was born in 51, and all my uncles, my dad, they all served in World War II, and that was the sacred war that was okay. But you couldn't ask them questions about it, because they didn't want to talk about their war experiences.
Right.
And then we were into the Cold War, and then the Vietnam War. I mean, I was born during the Korean War. We had the war on poverty, the war on drugs, the war on this. I mean, it's like my whole 60 years I've been here, it's been one big war. And I feel that. And,
Yes.
and I mean, that's, what the fuck's going on?
What's going on? Yeah. We are a culture that is constantly at war. And when we're not in a military war, as you're rightly pointing out, we're at war with something constantly. We were born out of war, illegitimate war. This country, we're born out of genocide, invading the native people's homes. And we are continually, we all know about birth trauma for the individual. How about birth trauma for a nation? We're born out of illegitimate invasion and genocide. And we keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it, and will until we scrape off the lousy paint jobs and look in a naked way at these matters and work to heal them. The United States, the longest period of peace, meaning we don't even know what peace is in this country, but the longest period of non-violence regarding military action. That's what I mean by peace. The longest period we've ever had without armed conflict in the United States was the Great Depression. That was our experience of peace when the whole country was falling apart. After the Great Depression, the longest period we've ever had between armed conflicts is 4.5 years. When historians count the numbers of wars the United States has been in, depending on how they define a war, it comes out to over 50 since our founding to several hundred wars since our founding. It comes out to 54 when we count, the Indian Wars as one war of 115 years duration, 1776 to 1890. A lot of historians say that was one war. Our Indian nations don't say that was one war. No way. A new war against every sovereign nation. So we don't know what peace is. We don't know how to live in it. We've never created it on this continent. In contrast, Japan outlawed war in their constitution after World War II, and is rated and has not been in armed conflict since then. Vietnam hasn't been in any armed conflict since 1979. The Chinese invaded in the north, and Vietnam stopped the Khmer Rouge in the south in 79, and they haven't been in an armed conflict since then. And their children are different than ours. There are a lot of reasons, of course, cultural and moral and spiritual reasons, but one of the reasons is truly they're not afraid of war. They don't expect it. They've been raised in peacetime. And they act differently than most of our kids because they expect and practice open-heartedness and forgiveness and welcome and expect life to be okay and expect the common will to work together for the betterment of all. So we are in such inherent conflict and have been since our founding And that's what you're expressing to us. It's true. We all live in a chronic war and violence environment, and we have extraordinary amounts of work to do to transform that.
You gotta wonder if we don't like war.
Oh, I believe we do. Yeah, we do. We get off on it.
Good business.
We need to take a break.
Right. Whoops.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah. So, one more question. One more question.
Oh, it's just a comment, yeah. I mean, I recognize this country's addicted to war. And like, the entire country needs a 12-step program for war. Like a lot of us I grew up watching the Vietnam War with Walter Cronkite and CBS News every night, how many Americans have been killed and how many Vietnamese have been killed. And I was 15 in '73 when the U.S. pulled out of Vietnam, and I thought, thank God. Never again in my life will my country be so stupid as to attack a country like Vietnam. I thought I can finally be free of this shit for the rest of my life. And then Iraq happens. I couldn't fucking believe it, Iraq and Afghanistan. And I thought, I can remember it, and I wouldn't, and I was just perplexed by this. And somebody said, the government, but they probably just forgot. I said, forgot. Rumsfeld was the guy in Vietnam, and he was the guy who architected Iraq. You can't tell me Rumsfeld, couldn't remember this? It's an addiction. It's like people perplexed. Why a drunk after some violent drunken episode? Oh, certainly he's never going to drink again. We can't reason ourselves out of this. And I also, just one more observation, I noticed when we proposed the war in Iraq, the three countries that had the biggest hard-on for going along with this and supporting the U.S. were the U.S., Australia, and England. Not one of them. France said no way, Germany said no way. Australia, England, and the U.S. haven't had a war on their own soil since, 200 years? Yeah, Britain suffered the Blitz, but they didn't have troops beating down doors, raping children, shooting people. The U.S. not since the Civil War.
We got 9/11.
Yes.
Well, you live in L.A., I have to bigger. LA is a huge war zone. Anyway, I think we need to take a break, and what I would like to do is, I want to sing that song again before we go out, the Warrior song, because there's something about that we have to, And more, this is not done, we're not done with this. We're going to be here, we're here all week. This is only day one, so.
We're just getting into it
we're
together,
just,
brothers. Vietnam, to just close up the anguish that we've opened together this morning, because we're feeling it. Some of us shared it during break. Lots more personal stories are squeezing out that many of us carry from our experiences of warfare, however and wherever we had it. So, and this kind of awareness can guide us to feeling profound hopelessness and despair. As the pain is too big, the wounds are too big and massive, and they wrap the globe as their hope. There is hope, and there is healing, and I am sure of that. And we will together work for that healing. We're not going to talk about how to get there now, but we're going to get there together. So I do want to share one more brief story to help us contain and carry what we've begun to open together. And this is from Vietnam and from the Mekong Delta again. Right across the river from Tam Tien, my wounded VC friend. I quoted him last night. Mr. Tiger, Nguyen Tam Ho, is a 91-year-old Vietnamese elder who I quoted him in saying that perhaps the bullet was the messenger of karma. Last night, I want to tell you another teaching of Mr. Tiger's. He's also a beloved and honored elder with great wisdom. So one of our vets was in dialogue with Mr. Tiger, and our vet was saying, like the other story I told last night about karma, our vet was saying, I don't get it. I was only here a few months. The war ravaged me. But you're fine. What's the difference between us? Why are you okay after 25 years of war, and I'm a mess my whole life after only a few months of war? And, why do I have PTSD and you don't? And Mr. Tiger said, Well, I do understand the psychological and the spiritual suffering of the American veterans, and it really isn't here in Vietnam the way it is for you in America. And the reason is very simple. Mr. Tiger said, in America, you look for the wound here. But in Vietnam, we know the wound is really here. And we treat each other by loving each other back to health and well-being and sanity and inclusion. And that's what we want to give you. Look in your hearts, open your hearts as we've opening ours to you, and we can heal and all will be well. And he was right. The Vietnamese have done it for each other, for our returnees, and we're working together to do it for each other here.